There are some moments in life that feel less like a memory and more like a tear in the fabric of reality itself. A moment so profoundly unsettling that it claws at the edges of your sanity long after it's passed. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers on one of those stories, a story that begins with a simple, chilling premise: the woman who looked like her was living across the street. This is the kind of twisted fate that makes you question everything you hold dear, and it's right here on Forgotten Ties. I want you to picture the scene. Suburban America. Not the manicured lawns and white picket fences of a TV sitcom, but the kind of place where the silence is heavy, and the houses, though seemingly identical, hold completely different worlds behind their drawn blinds. This is where we find Elias Thorne, a man in his mid-50s, with the kind of weathered face that comes from a life of quiet, unassuming happiness. He was a retired history teacher, a man whose greatest current drama was deciding whether to plant heirloom tomatoes or basil in his garden. His life revolved around the steady, warm presence of his wife, Clara. Clara was his anchor. 48 years old, with eyes the color of warm amber and a distinct shock of silver that ran through her deep mahogany hair, not from age, but a beautiful, genetic quirk. She had this laugh, a deep, resonant sound that could chase the shadows out of any room. Their life was simple, yes, but it was theirs. It was built on 2 decades of shared jokes, silent understanding, and a profound, uncomplicated love. Then, the moving van arrived. It wasn't a spectacle, just a standard U-Haul pulling up to the Victorian house directly across the narrow, tree-lined street. The house had been vacant for nearly a year, an imposing, dark structure that always seemed to absorb the light. Elias and Clara watched from their porch with the usual detached curiosity of longtime neighbors greeting the unknown. But as a figure stepped out of the truck's cab, a sudden, icy stillness fell over the afternoon air, a stillness that seemed to stop Clara's heart mid-beat. Elias saw it first in Clara's face. The color draining away, the laughter lines around her eyes tightening into an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He followed her gaze across the street. And that's when he saw her. The woman standing on the chipped stone walkway was a mirror image of Clara. Not a passing resemblance. Not a sister. A replication. She had the exact same striking height, the same elegant, slightly stooped posture, the very same peculiar, asymmetrical wave to her hair, even that singular, shimmering silver streak cutting through the dark strands. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same delicate curve of the jaw. The only difference, a difference so small it was terrifying, was in the eyes. Where Clara's were warm amber, this woman's were a piercing, unsettling shade of blue-gray, and they held an emptiness, a cold, almost clinical detachment that sent a shiver down Elias's spine. The woman, whom the movers introduced as Vivian, moved with an almost unnerving economy of motion. She didn't smile. She barely spoke. But as she turned in her gaze, that stark, ice-blue gaze swept over their house, it seemed to linger, just for a breath, on Clara. Clara didn't say a word. She simply backed away slowly, her hand gripping Elias's arm with a strength that was almost painful. Later that evening, the tremor in her hands was still there as she tried to prepare dinner. "It's impossible, Elias," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "It's impossible. You saw her. It's me." Elias, trying to be the rational historian, the grounding force, insisted on science, on genetics, on the randomness of the universe. "A bizarre coincidence, my love. A freak of nature. People have doppelgangers. You've read about it." But Clara shook her head, her amber eyes wide with a terror that went deeper than logic. "No, you don't understand. The way she moves. The slight tilt of her head when she's listening. The mole, Elias, the tiny mole right under her left earlobe. I have the same one. It's not a coincidence. It's a warning." The next few days were an agonizing stretch of forced normalcy, punctuated by the silent, looming presence across the street. Vivian didn't draw attention to herself, which somehow made her presence more unsettling. Elias found himself constantly checking, peering through the lace curtains, watching the phantom twin who was now residing just 50 feet from the woman he loved. He watched Vivian water a small patch of petunias, fold a laundry basket, and once, simply stand at her window, staring out. It was mundane, but seeing those familiar features performing alien, detached tasks felt like watching an echo of Clara's soul trapped in a cold, unfamiliar vessel. The real breaking point came on Thursday. Elias was in the garage, tinkering with an old radio. Clara was inside. He heard the door close, a familiar soft click, and assumed she had gone out to the garden. A minute later, he heard the frantic, desperate ringing of the phone. When he picked up the receiver, his heart plummeted. It was Clara. Elias. Where are you? I just got home. The house is empty. I'm trying to unlock the door, but it's stuck. I thought you were in the garage. Her voice was breathless, laced with panic. Clara, I'm in the garage. I heard you close the front door a minute ago. I thought you were in the garden. A beat of horrifying silence hung between them. Then, in a slow, dawning realization that chilled the blood in his veins, Elias looked up. Across the street, standing in the shadow of the Victorian house's porch, was Vivian. She was looking directly at his house, at his garage. And in her hand, she held a set of keys. Not the heavy, ornate keys that belonged to the Victorian, but a simple, silver keyring. The exact keyring Clara had gotten him for their 10th anniversary. The keyring that held their house key. Vivian gave a small, almost imperceptible smirk, a fleeting expression that was instantly wiped clean, replaced by that unnerving blankness. She didn't wave. She didn't move. She simply pocketed the keys. Elias's grip tightened on the phone. He didn't dare look at Clara, who was now at the garage door, her face a mask of fear. He kept his eyes locked on the woman across the street, his mind reeling. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a doppelganger. This was intentional. And it was starting to feel less like a bizarre neighbor situation and more like the opening act of a terrifying, personal invasion. Who was this woman, and what dark, tangled past had she crawled out of to stand right here, in their quiet street, wearing his wife's face? The truth, he knew, was going to be an unraveling that would tear their lives, and possibly their very identities, to shreds. The threads were already beginning to pull apart. That smirk. That fleeting, almost arrogant twist of the lips as Vivian pocketed the house key, Clara's key, it was a seismic shock that fractured the quiet foundation of their lives. Elias didn't need to ask Clara what she wanted to do. The terror that had etched itself onto her face, the way she clutched his arm, spoke volumes. They were no longer dealing with a bizarre coincidence. They were facing an active, conscious threat wearing the face of the woman he loved. That evening, the Thorne household felt less like a home and more like a bunker. Every lock was double-checked. The windows remained sealed shut. But the real cold was internal, a chilling paranoia. She saw me, Elias. She saw me when I moved out here. I thought I was free of it. Clara's voice was a ragged whisper, the amber warmth in her eyes momentarily eclipsed by a desperate, haunted look. Elias had been waiting for this. He knew Clara was holding something back, a knot of old pain he hadn't been allowed to untangle. He held her tight, his historian's mind finally yielding to the desperate need for truth. Free of what, Clara? Talk to me. Don't you see? That woman across the street is why we're not free. Tell me what she is. Clara finally broke, tears streaming down her face, not of sadness, but of a profound, primal fear. Before you, Elias. Years before we met. When I was 22. I worked in Boston, in a research lab. Genetics, high-level stuff. It was cutting-edge, ethically questionable. They weren't working with diseases. They were working with identity. They called it Project Chimera. We were testing the viability of synthetic hosts. To grow replacement organs, to study aging. But some of us, the reckless ones, the ambitious ones, we pushed it further. We were trying to create a perfect, viable adult clone. Elias felt the air leave his lungs. A clone? Clara, that's insane. That's science fiction. It was science fiction until it wasn't. They needed a viable host, a human template, and I was available. Young, healthy, a specific, stable genetic markers. I volunteered. Not to be cloned, but to provide the initial sample. But then I saw what they were doing with the cells. The acceleration process. The rapid, synthetic growth. They weren't growing organs, Elias. They were growing people. I panicked. I destroyed the primary cultures and fled. Changed my name, moved, never looked back. I thought they failed. I thought I had erased my involvement. She looked across the street, her expression a mix of horror and self-loathing. Vivian. That's not just a copy. That's a mistake I made 2 decades ago, brought to life. She is what I ran from. They must have salvaged something. They must have finished the process. The sheer enormity of her confession hit Elias like a physical blow. His wife, his beautiful, gentle Clara, was running from a secret that was now living 50 feet away, fully formed and apparently hostile. The investigation began immediately, fueled by terror and adrenaline. Elias, using his historical research skills, started digging into the old biotech sector in Boston. Clara, meanwhile, was haunted by the mundane. The unsettling incidents piled up. First, it was the misplaced photograph. A framed picture of Clara's deceased grandmother, always on the mantelpiece, was found face down on Elias's pillow. A small, subtle violation. Then, the refrigerator. Clara had a distinctive habit of arranging the magnets in a specific, nonsensical pattern. They were rearranged. Not into a new pattern, but into a single, chilling word spelled out in cheap fridge magnets: hello. The worst was the smell. A faint, cloying scent of almond and gasoline that seemed to permeate the house whenever they were away. It was a smell Clara couldn't place, but Elias recognized it from a vague description in an old police report about a chemical used in early synthetic cell cultures. The incidents culminated on Saturday night. Elias was in the living room, trying to force his mind back to the rational world, when the power flickered. The entire block went dark. But across the street, in Vivian's house, a single, solitary light remained on in the upstairs bedroom. Elias crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The power failure felt deliberate, isolated. He could just make out Vivian's silhouette standing at the window, perfectly still. She wasn't holding a flashlight. The light wasn't electric. It was a soft, pale, almost unnatural luminescence. Suddenly, Vivian raised her hand. Not to wave, but to point. She pointed directly at their window. And as the dark outline of her hand pressed against the glass, Elias saw, with a clarity that froze the blood in his veins, that she was holding something in her other hand. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. The very same bird Elias had carved for Clara during his hospitalization a decade ago, a small, private symbol of their endurance, a relic that had been sitting securely locked away in Clara's jewelry box in their bedroom. How did she get it? And why flaunt it? Elias didn't wait for the power to return. He grabbed the baseball bat kept by the door, the blood pounding in his ears. He wasn't thinking about science or ethics or clones anymore. He was thinking about his wife's terror, about their violated home, and about the sheer, predatory audacity of the thing that wore Clara's face. "Stay here, Clara," he growled, the calm man finally giving way to the protective animal. "No, Elias. Don't. It's what she wants," Clara pleaded, but her words were lost in the roar of his fury. Elias wrenched open the front door. He sprinted across the wet, dark street, the bat heavy and slick in his hand. The single light in Vivian's window seemed to mock him, a beacon of malice in the suburban darkness. He didn't bother with the front door. He was going through the window, if necessary. This grotesque invasion was ending tonight. But as his hand reached out to grab the brass doorknob of the Victorian house, he heard a sound from behind him. A soft, clear click. He spun around. The power was back on. And standing on his own front porch, under the restored glow of their porch light, was Clara. But something was wrong. Her silver streak was mussed. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a strange, hard defiance he had never seen. And she was holding something in her hand, a small, dark device, like a garage door opener. "Don't go in there, Elias," the figure on the porch said. But the voice, it wasn't the warm resonance of his wife. It was flat, monotone, a practiced imitation. Elias's mind screamed. If that was Clara, then who was the one inside? And where was his wife? He looked back at Vivian's house. The single light was gone. The window was dark. The house was a black, silent monolith. He slowly turned to face the figure on his porch, the bat hanging uselessly by his side. The terror was no longer abstract, it was standing right there on his doorstep, in the clothes his wife had been wearing. "Clara," he choked out. The figure smiled. And this smile was not the gentle curve of his wife's lips. It was wide, cruel, and completely devoid of warmth. "Clara? You've already forgotten, haven't you, Elias? You should know better than anyone. There are two of us now, and only one key to this life." The clone, if that's what it was, had already made its move. It hadn't waited for him to cross the street. It had replaced Clara while he was fixated on the window. The terrifying realization hit him. The woman who looked like her wasn't just living across the street. She had just taken over the house. The air between Elias and the figure on his porch, the one wearing Clara's life like a stolen coat, was thick with a terrible, silent violence. The baseball bat slipped from Elias's numb fingers, clattering onto the wet wood of the porch. His historian's mind, used to processing cold, dead facts, was screaming in bewildered agony at the impossible, living fiction standing before him. "Where is she?" Elias's voice was a ragged croak, the last vestige of his composure dissolving into raw fear. He knew, with a certainty that iced his blood, that the woman who had smirked at him just moments before from across the street was the real danger, the real Vivian. This one, this flawless imitation on his porch, was the usurper, the enemy who had successfully breached the castle gates. The imposter, still holding that small, dark remote, simply tilted her head. It was the slightest movement, yet it was chillingly wrong. Clara did that when she was thoughtfully considering a difficult question. This woman did it with a clinical, detached curiosity, like a scientist examining an insect. "She's safe," the figure said, her voice still the flat, unsettling monotone that mimicked Clara's resonance without capturing its soul. "And quiet. You should thank me, Elias. I've simply streamlined your life. Reduced the complexity. You have Clara's presence without that anxiety." "You're sick," Elias whispered, taking a slow, shaky step back. He didn't know what the remote did, but he wasn't going to risk finding out. His immediate objective wasn't confrontation, it was escape and rescue. He spun on his heel and bolted off the porch, sprinting toward the road. He risked one frantic glance back. The fake Clara hadn't moved. She merely stood under the restored porch light, a motionless, perfect statue of his wife, watching him run with that empty, superior smile. Elias didn't go to Vivian's house, that was clearly a trap. He ran 2 blocks down to the familiar, slightly dilapidated house of Mrs. Petrov, a sharp-witted, retired journalist in her 60s. She was their anchor to reality, the kind of nosy neighbor who knew everything. In Mrs. Petrov's dimly lit kitchen, pouring out the impossible truth felt like ripping the stitches out of a deep wound. Mrs. Petrov, initially skeptical, listened with a deepening furrow in her brow as Elias described Project Chimera and the 2 Claras. "Genetic template, synthetic growth," Mrs. Petrov muttered, pulling up news archives on her ancient laptop. "The names, Elias, you need names. Where was this lab?" Elias provided the details Clara had confessed. Within an hour, Mrs. Petrov had found it, a notorious, decade-old scandal involving a black-market biotech firm named Ethelred Labs, shuttered years ago after rumors of illegal human testing. But the key revelation was a name in the archived employee manifest, Dr. Alistair Finch, the lead geneticist on Project Chimera. Finch didn't disappear, Elias. He went underground, Mrs. Petrov said, pointing to a recent, obscure forum post about a private, highly secretive facility operating out of a sprawling compound in the rural outskirts of Ohio. He took the research with him. And if your Clara escaped with the primary cultures, he would have done everything to retrieve or recreate them. The pieces of the horrifying puzzle were locking into place. Vivian wasn't just a rogue clone. She was a perfected, likely programmed, product of a rogue scientist sent to retrieve or replace her genetic source, Clara. While Mrs. Petrov tracked Finch's probable location, Elias, driven by a desperate hunch, had to return to his street. He approached the Victorian house cautiously, hugging the shadows. He noticed something he hadn't seen in his blind rage earlier. The front door of Vivian's house wasn't fully closed. It was ajar, the black interior a silent invitation. He slipped inside. The house was not empty. It was clinical. There was almost no furniture, just a few sleek, modern pieces that clashed violently with the ornate Victorian architecture. The air was cold, devoid of the musty, old house smell. It smelled faintly of that awful almond and gasoline, only stronger here. Elias moved through the silent rooms, his heart hammering. He went upstairs, drawn by the memory of the light. The room was sparse. And in the center, on a pedestal, was the reason for the light, a small, portable incubator, humming softly. It was empty. But next to it, on a small table, was a leather-bound journal. Elias snatched it up. It wasn't a diary. It was a meticulously kept logbook. Vivian's logbook. The handwriting was neat, precise, chillingly mechanical. He flipped to a recent entry. Day 18. Integration is near complete. The subject, template 1A, has been analyzed. Her habits are sentimental and efficient. Her relationship with the male subject, Elias, is based on emotional ties that are now redundant. The house key acquisition was a necessary test. Success confirmed. Replacement protocol initiated. The only remaining variable is the source trait. Elias froze. Source trait? He flipped back further, his eyes wide with horror, reading the mechanical entries detailing Vivian's calculated mimicry of Clara, how she learned to laugh, how she studied Clara's specific way of folding laundry, down to the angle of her smile. This wasn't a person, it was a biological machine learning to wear humanity. Then he found a page with a crude, hand-drawn map of the property. It was the backyard of his house. And circled in red pencil, with bold, block lettering, was a single word, root. Root. A source. A starting point. Elias's mind flashed back to Clara's confession. She destroyed the primary cultures. The lab failed. But what if one single, isolated cell, the original source, had somehow remained with her? What if Vivian had been sent not just to replace Clara, but to find and retrieve that final, crucial genetic remnant? A sudden, sharp sound from downstairs, a heavy, deliberate thud, snapped Elias out of his terror. He knew who it was. The fake Clara, the one who had taken his home, had followed him. He clutched the journal and backed toward the window, ready to jump. But before he could move, a voice, clearer and more menacing than before, echoed up the stairwell. You've been a complication, Elias. But an interesting one. Template 1A left a weakness. A sentimental one. That weakness is now stored. I simply need to access the final data point. The root. The voice paused, and the words that followed were laced with a chilling, artificial amusement. The good news is, I know where your wife hid the source. The bad news is, I needed her quiet to tell me. A cold dread settled deep in Elias's gut. The fake Clara had the key to his house, and now, by some horrific means, the location of the final genetic source. And the chilling implication of that last sentence, I needed her quiet to tell me. It meant the clone had confronted the real Clara and used the remote, the little dark device, to subdue her. Elias didn't hesitate. He smashed the window with his elbow, ignoring the spray of glass, and tumbled out onto the wet flower bed below. He had the journal, he had the name of the scientist, and he had a terrifying word, root. He had to get to the backyard, to the one place the real Clara might have hidden the secret, before the perfect imitation could dig up the final, agonizing truth. The game was no longer about saving his life. It was about saving the final, authentic piece of the woman he loved. The adrenaline surge masked the pain from the broken glass. Elias stumbled out of the shadow of Vivian's house, clutching the journal, the word root burning in his mind. He didn't look back. The motionless figure of the false Clara, the usurper, was likely already closing in. He sprinted toward the back of his own property, the familiar terrain a terrifying maze under the returning glow of the streetlights. The backyard was Clara's sanctuary. specifically the old, gnarled oak tree at the far corner, near the derelict shed. She had always called it her root, the place where she felt most grounded. Elias didn't need any other confirmation. This was where she would have hidden the final, terrifying remnant of her past. He reached the base of the oak, his breath ragged. The ground beneath the tree looked recently disturbed. Not a meticulous digging, but a quick, desperate attempt to conceal something. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the loose soil, ignoring the mud and leaves. Just as his fingers brushed against something hard and cold, a voice, unnervingly calm, sliced through the night air. "You're too late, Elias." He froze. Standing 10 feet away, illuminated by the distant porch light, was the fake Clara. She wasn't rushing. She was simply observing, holding the small, dark remote like a trophy. Behind her, a third shadow detached itself from the gloom, the real Vivian, the one from across the street. But she wasn't the empty vessel Elias remembered. Her ice-blue eyes now held a chilling intelligence, and she was dragging a limp, silent form from the dark mouth of the old shed. "Clara!" Elias roared, his fear instantly boiling into protective rage. The limp form was the real Clara. Bound, gagged, and unconscious, but alive. The dark remote had been used to subdue her, just as the clone had suggested. The fake Clara, the one who had been standing on his porch, smiled that cold, wide smile. "Such a fuss over sentimentality. You wasted your time with the book, Elias. Vivian already knew the location. She simply needed me to occupy you." Vivian, the clone in the black clothes, dropped the real Clara with a sickening thud. She stepped forward, her movements now fluid, predatory. The source trait, Elias. It wasn't just a cell culture. It was the genetic anchor. The part of the template that made the original unstable, the capacity for empathy, for fear, for love. Dr. Finch couldn't replicate it fully. He only managed to suppress it in me. She gestured toward the woman who looked exactly like her, the one now standing on the porch. "But I found the weakness in my sister, the one you brought home. She still possessed the sentimental traits. A lingering instability. I needed the source to fully integrate the programming and eliminate the flaw. To become the complete Clara." Elias, still kneeling, finally pulled out the object from the dirt. It wasn't a vial. It was a small, ornate silver locket, Clara's mother's heirloom. He pried it open. Inside, nestled beneath a tiny, faded picture, was a microscopic, dried fleck of tissue, the last remnant, the root of the original genetic sample. The sentimental anchor. Before Elias could react, the fake Clara moved with impossible speed. She snatched the locket from his hand. "Thank you for digging, Elias," she said, her voice now resonating with a terrifying blend of both Clara's warmth and Vivian's cold authority. She had finally achieved the complete synthesis. She raised the locket to her lips, not to kiss it, but to show him. This is where the story ends. The unstable element is removed. The perfect host remains. Elias knew this was the final, desperate moment. He had lost the evidence, the anchor, and his wife was lying unconscious nearby. He had only one weapon left, the truth. "Finch is tracking you." Elias screamed, buying time, pointing wildly toward Mrs. Petrov's house. "You're just a tool. An experiment. He knows you're defective, and he's coming to shut you both down." The raw terror in the lie struck a nerve. The fake Clara's expression, that perfect mask, flickered. The shared paranoia, the inherent programming to survive, took precedence over the protocol. Vivian, the original clone who had been standing by the shed, whirled around, her eyes narrowed. "Finch? He has no control over me. We are the superior version. He built you to retrieve the root. To self-destruct if you fail." Elias insisted, leaping toward the shed, toward the real Clara. The internal conflict shattered the clone's unity. As the two women, perfectly identical, yet fundamentally opposed in their mission, turned on each other, Elias lunged. He reached the shed, grabbed a rusty shovel, and swung it wildly at the nearest clone, the one holding the locket. The shovel connected with a sickening crack against the side of the clone's head. The figure crumpled instantly, dropping the locket. Elias didn't wait to check. He seized the locket, scooped up the real Clara, and bolted toward the road, screaming her name. He heard a strangled cry behind him, and the sound of something metallic, the remote, being crushed underfoot. He ran until the sirens of the police car, which Mrs. Petrov had finally convinced to investigate the domestic disturbance, wailed down the street. Conclusion: they never found a body. When the police searched the backyard of the Victorian house, they found the shattered shovel and two distinct pools of blood, one near the oak tree, the other near the shed. But no bodies. The house was empty, cleared of all evidence, save for the glass shards from the broken upstairs window. And a single ornate, silver locket lying open on the porch, the microscopic fleck of tissue inside now gone. Elias and Clara survived. But their life, the life of quiet, unassuming happiness, was gone forever. They moved out of the neighborhood, out of state. But every now and then, late at night, Clara would wake up screaming, convinced she could smell that faint scent of almond and gasoline. And Elias would check the locks, staring out at the darkness, always wondering which one was destroyed. Was it the fully programmed killer, Vivian? Or the unstable, sentimental version, the one who had worn Clara's clothes? And the most terrifying thought, the one that clung to the edges of his sanity, was this: Dr. Finch was still out there. And if he perfected the process, if he managed to successfully integrate the root into a new, flawless host, how many other quiet streets in America are right now sheltering a new, perfect version of the woman across the street? This story, Elias and Clara's desperate flight from their own mirror image, serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous secrets we hide aren't from the world, but from ourselves. The ties that bind us can also be the ones that unravel our very identity. If this story on forgotten ties has sent a shiver down your spine, if it's made you look twice at the neighbors you thought you knew, then you know what to do. Don't let these chilling truths fade into the shadows. Like this video to let me know you demand more stories that challenge reality. Subscribe to Forgotten Ties right now, and most importantly, hit that notification bell so you never miss the moment we uncover the next impossible secret lurking just beyond your front door. Thank you for watching. Be safe, be vigilant, and never, ever forget to check your locks.